My AP literature teacher failed every essay I wrote with 10% while giving A's to students whose parents paid for his private tutoring, and it was destroying our college applications. A quarter of the way through my senior year, our AP literature teacher went on medical leave and was replaced by a certain Mr. Jenkins. Suddenly with him, I was failing all my tests. And I don't mean 25% because I didn't study. I mean from straight A's to 10% despite doing what I always was. Your essay seems plagiarized. You're lucky I'm not expelling you, he'd say about an assignment he saw me handcraft in front of him. Even stranger, when I compared essays with high-scoring students, even they'd tell me mine was better. Then I noticed the pattern. Mr. Jenkins offered after-school tutoring, and all the kids whose parents paid for it, they got the high marks. The rest of us just filled out the bell curve. I decided to put my theory to the test. Next assignment, I produced my best work yet. I got help from a professor at a community college. I paid for Grammarly Premium. Even ran it through every online grader I could find. Mr. Jenkins gave me 18%, but instead of just leaving his class how he expected, I pulled out my previous essays from our old teacher. I asked him to tell me what changed, and his response made my blood boil. Your previous teacher was too lenient. My standards prepare you for college reality. He started to add something. The only students who succeed in my class are ones who, he caught himself mid-sentence, his face flushing, then dismissed me. Within weeks, my GPA crashed from 4.0 to 3.2. I watched my dream schools slip away, but the valedictorian Yvette kept defending Jenkins for some reason. During one lunch discussion about it, she snapped at our group. You don't know him like, you don't know his teaching methods. She cut herself off strangely, her face reddening. My parents went nuclear at the parent-teacher conference. My mom was practically shaking. My son went from straight A's to failing overnight. Explain that. Other parents piled on. That's when things got weird. Jenkins leaned over and whispered something to Principal Wood. I watched the principal's hands literally start shaking. Then completely unprompted, he said, let's not make this a legal matter. Nobody had mentioned lawyers. The meeting ended with explanations about curriculum changes and competitive year groups. After that, things actually got worse. Jenkins started announcing my grades publicly. 10%. Disappointing as usual. My third rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday. This one was from my safety school. That's when I cracked. I enrolled in his tutoring, but A's weren't the only reason I joined. You see, right before joining, I sent multiple essays that Jenkins failed to the literature professor I knew. His grading email came a week later, right as Jenkins started giving me A's. These are minimum 80%. The original grading is either incompetent or criminal. Armed with this, I went straight to Jenkins during his office hours. I laid out the professor's evaluations, but he barely glanced at them. Different teachers, different standards. That professor doesn't understand my rubric. Your rubric that gives 10% to essays that other professionals rate at 85%? If you have a problem, take it up with administration. So I did. My parents and I met with Principal Wood for the third time the next day. This time we had the professor's grades and the sudden A's. Wood shifted in his seat. I understand your frustrations, he began, but Mr. Jenkins is a respected educator. I can't override his academic judgment based on one outside opinion. Then get more opinions, my dad shot back. Have the department review these. That's not how we handle grading disputes. My mom leaned forward. Then how do we handle teachers taking bribes for grades? Wood's face went red. That's a serious accusation. Without proof? The proof is right there. She pointed at the papers. Every kid who pays gets A's. Every kid who doesn't fails. Correlation isn't causation. Wood pushed the papers back. If you continue finding problems, I'll have to ask you to leave. I ended up sharing the professor's grading with the rest of the class. And over the next 2 weeks, 7 other families had a meeting with Wood. Everyone was dismissed the same way. That's when Mrs. Lapp, whose daughter lost Columbia, created a Facebook group with all the parents whose kids were screwed over. She typed the magic words, school board. The next meeting was 3 weeks away. They started organizing, created docs with evidence. Someone even hired an independent education auditor who confirmed the statistical impossibility of the grade distribution. Jenkins must have caught wind of it though. Suddenly, he was on his best behavior, still failing those not in tutoring, but now with longer, more detailed feedback that really said nothing. Principal Wood started sitting in on his classes, pretending to observe but really trying to intimidate us. 2 days before the board meeting, he called my parents. I've reviewed Mr. Jenkins' grading and found no improprieties. I hope this settles the matter. See you at the board meeting then, my mom replied and hung up. The morning of the meeting, Jenkins did something stupid. He pulled me aside. Your parents are making a mistake, he said quietly. This won't end well for anyone, especially you. I smirked. I'd been audio recording him. I pulled out my phone and his face dropped. Delete that now. He lunged for my phone. I yanked my phone back hard and stumbled into the lockers behind me, while Jenkins grabbed at empty air where my phone had been. The security guard came running around the corner and saw Jenkins with his arms stretched out toward me, and me pressed against the lockers clutching my phone to my chest. The guard pushed between us and told Jenkins to back up immediately while Jenkins started yelling about privacy laws and how I was recording him without permission. My hands were shaking, but I kept that phone pressed tight against me because that recording had everything including his threat and him attacking me. The vice principal showed up less than 2 minutes later and took one look at the scene with Jenkins red-faced and the guard holding him back from me and immediately separated us into different rooms. She put me in the conference room and Jenkins in another office down the hall while she tried to figure out what happened. I texted my parents right away that Jenkins had physically attacked me trying to get my phone, and they texted back. They were leaving work immediately and calling their lawyer on the way. The vice principal came back looking shocked that a teacher would actually go after a student physically and started asking me questions about what led up to this. While sitting there waiting for my parents, I opened 3 different cloud services on my phone and uploaded that audio file to each one, then emailed copies to my parents and Mrs. Lapp with a subject line about Jenkins attacking me. The timestamp on the recording showed everything from his initial threat about my parents making a mistake through him demanding I delete it, and then the sounds of him lunging at me and me hitting the lockers. My parents burst through the office doors 20 minutes later with my mom practically vibrating with rage and my dad looking ready to tear someone apart. They demanded to know why Jenkins wasn't already suspended for putting his hands on their child, and the vice principal said she needed to follow proper protocol and investigate, but my mom cut her off saying the security guard literally witnessed the assault. My dad pulled out his phone and said he was calling the police to file assault charges if the school wasn't taking immediate action to protect students from a violent teacher. The vice principal asked me to show her my wrist where Jenkins had grabbed at me, and the school nurse came to document the red marks and light bruising that was already starting to show. She took photos from multiple angles angles for the incident report and kept shaking her head saying she'd worked here 15 years and never seen a teacher physically go after a student like this. The marks weren't serious, but they were clear evidence that he'd made contact with me, and combined with the security guard witnessing it and my audio recording, this was getting more serious by the minute. Principal Wood showed up about 40 minutes later looking like he'd run from wherever he was and immediately pulled the vice principal into the hallway for a hushed conversation. Through the door window, I could see him waving his hands around frantically while looking back at me and my parents every few seconds, and whatever control he thought he had over the situation was clearly gone now. Jenkins got escorted off campus by 2 security guards while basically the entire school watched from classroom windows, and within minutes my phone started blowing up with texts from other students. Word spread fast that Jenkins had attacked a student, and suddenly kids who had been too scared to speak up before started sending me their own Jenkins stories about unfair grades and weird comments he'd made. The dam was breaking and everyone could feel it happening in real time. Mrs. Lapp sent out an emergency message to all the parents in her Facebook group calling a meeting at her house during lunch, since it was only a few blocks from the school. 23 parents showed up, which was more than double what anyone expected, and every single one was furious about their kids' grades, and now even more angry that Jenkins had gotten physical with a student. I played the audio recording for everyone, and you could hear a pin drop when Jenkins's threat played, followed by the sounds of him coming at me. Parents started pulling out their phones to call the school board members directly and demand Jenkins be fired immediately. Honoria Lakegrove, the education auditor, was at the meeting too, and said she was rushing to finish her statistical analysis before tonight's board meeting, because this had gone from academic fraud to assault. Jenkins really picked the wrong kid to mess with, going from grade manipulation to grabbing at phones like some kind of discount villain who forgot cameras exist everywhere these days. Her preliminary findings showed the grade distribution in Jenkins's class was mathematically impossible without deliberate manipulation, and she was prepared to sign an affidavit stating her professional opinion that this was systematic grade fraud. She had charts showing how students in tutoring averaged 92%, while non-tutoring students averaged 28%, which just doesn't happen naturally in any legitimate classroom. After the parent meeting, I went to see Imogen Oakridge, the guidance counselor, who had already heard about everything that happened that morning. She helped me draft a letter explaining the whole grade situation to send to colleges along with my mid-year reports, and said she'd been suspicious of Jenkins's grading for weeks, but couldn't prove anything until now. She promised to personally call admissions offices at my top schools to advocate for affected students, and explain that our transcripts didn't reflect our actual academic ability this semester. During lunch the next day, I watched several classmates huddle around a laptop in the corner of the cafeteria, typing furiously into what looked like a massive spreadsheet. They waved me over and showed me columns tracking every student in our class, whether they paid for tutoring and their current grades. The pattern jumped off the screen like a neon sign. Every single kid whose parents shelled out money had A's or B's, while the rest of us sat at D's and F's. One kid leaned over and admitted his parents paid $5,000 for the whole year, cash only, no receipts. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom saying Mrs. Lapp just sent something urgent to the parent group. I opened the message to find a screenshot of a payment app transaction showing $800 sent directly to Jenkins's personal account with a note, October tutoring. Mrs. Lapp had found it while helping her daughter with college financial aid forms, and realized they never got any official school documentation for the payment. She immediately added it to our growing evidence folder stored on a shared drive that now had over 40 parents accessing it. That afternoon in the library, I stumbled across the district policy manual while researching for a different class, and decided to search for tutoring policies. Right there on page 127, clear as day, the district prohibited teachers from requiring paid services that affected grades, specifically mentioning tutoring as an example, with violations resulting in immediate termination. I took photos of every relevant page and uploaded them to the parent folder. Within an hour, 3 parents had already forwarded the policy to Principal Wood with demands for action. An anonymous Google form started circulating through group chats asking students if Jenkins ever pressured them about tutoring. By dinner time, 14 responses came in describing threats about college prospects, with several kids quoting Jenkins saying they'd never get into good schools without his special help. The form creator, whoever they were, compiled everything into a document showing the exact same threatening language used across multiple students. Walking to my car after school, I nearly bumped into Yvette standing by the side entrance, looking like she hadn't slept in days, with dark circles under her eyes and her usually perfect hair pulled into a messy bun. She grabbed my arm and whispered that her parents forced her to defend Jenkins because he wrote all her recommendation letters and threatened to withdraw them if she spoke against him, leaving her trapped between keeping quiet and losing her college acceptances. Her hands shook as she showed me an email from Jenkins reminding her about their understanding regarding her continued support. I told her to screenshot everything, and she nodded before hurrying away. My dad spent that evening filling out the district's formal grade appeal paperwork, a 20-page document requiring extensive documentation, which we now had plenty of thanks to the professor's evaluations, and my audio recording of Jenkins lunging at me. The district had 30 days to respond according to their own policy, but Dad figured tonight's board meeting might speed things up if enough parents showed up angry. Principal Wood must have gotten nervous because he called my parents around 7, warning them about the district's recording policies and potential consequences for disrupting the school environment. My mom put him on speaker, so I could hear him threatening suspension for any student who continued to agitate the situation. She cut him off mid-sentence, told him that a teacher physically attacking a student was the real disruption, and hung up while he was still talking. Dad high-fived her across the kitchen table. Mrs. Lapp texted the group that another parent just discovered something huge. A teacher who left last spring apparently filed a complaint about Jenkins that mysteriously disappeared from district records. The teacher wouldn't speak publicly, but confirmed privately to the parent that Wood buried the complaint after Jenkins threatened to sue for defamation. This showed a clear pattern of Wood protecting Jenkins and covering up problems. The parent had gotten the teacher to write down the basic facts in an email, carefully worded to avoid legal issues but still confirming the complaint existed. My phone lit up with a Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize. A former student from 2 years ago saw posts about Jenkins in a local community group and wanted to share her story. She described the exact same pattern, failing grades that magically improved to A's after her parents paid for tutoring, and offered to write a formal statement since she felt safe speaking up now that she was in college. She even had her old grade grade reports showing the sudden jump from F's to A's within 2 weeks of starting tutoring. I forwarded her information to Mrs. Lapp, who immediately reached out to get the statement. Professor Ilaria from the community college sent an email confirming she would attend tonight's board meeting to testify about her evaluation of my essays. She had spent the week reviewing 6 more student papers at the request of various parents, and found the same pattern of unfair failing grades on work that deserved at least B's according to standard rubrics. Her professional reputation as a published author and 20-year teaching veteran would add serious weight to our claims. She attached a formal letter outlining her findings that parents could submit as evidence. The board meeting was set for 8 tonight, and already the parking lot was filling up by 7:30 when we arrived. Inside the building was packed with angry parents holding folders thick with evidence, and my mom grabbed us seats near the front, while Dad stood talking with other parents by the door. The board members sat behind a long table at the front, looking uncomfortable as more and more people filed in, and I noticed Jenkins sitting in the back corner trying to look invisible. Before the meeting even started, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom saying the teachers' union rep had just called her about Jenkins having due process rights, and warning that even with all our evidence, the district might just put him on paid leave instead of firing him right away. The union had to defend him even though the rep basically admitted she thought he was guilty, which made my blood boil, because here we were with proof of him destroying kids' futures, and he'd still get protected by some contract. The board chair called the meeting to order, and immediately tried to limit public comment to 3 minutes per person, but the crowd got loud fast, and she backed down to 5 minutes. Mrs. Lapp went first, laying out the evidence about the tutoring scheme and grade manipulation, while holding up charts showing the impossible grade distributions. When she finished, the board members just sat there silent until finally one asked if we had any proof beyond correlation, which made half the room groan. My dad was up next, and instead of just complaining, he announced he'd be filing a public records request for all emails between Jenkins, Wood, and the district about tutoring and grading policies. He'd already written it up with help from a lawyer friend to make sure they couldn't dodge it on some technicality, and the district would have to respond within 10 business days. The board members looked at each other nervously when he mentioned that emails might show how deep this went, and I saw Wood shift in his seat. More parents got up one after another, sharing stories about their kids going from A students to failing overnight, and how Jenkins had suggested tutoring as the only solution. During a break, I overheard someone saying that Hestia's aide had reached out wanting to meet with parent representatives before the next meeting, which meant the board was trying to figure out how bad this was getting. Mrs. Lapp had already agreed to go, but told them we weren't backing down no matter what deals they tried to offer. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was an unknown number with a text saying she was a reporter named Katura, who'd been investigating grade manipulation in the district for months. She wanted background information off the record, and said our situation fit a pattern she'd been tracking at other schools. I texted back that I'd talk, but wouldn't go on record until after the board meeting was done, because I didn't want to mess up our chance at getting Jenkins fired. When the meeting resumed, more parents testified, and someone mentioned that Jenkins had suddenly started writing long detailed feedback on papers the last few days, trying to make his grading look legitimate. But it was too late since we had months of papers with single sentence dismissals like needs work on essays that other teachers praised. His sudden change actually made him look more guilty, like he was trying to cover his tracks now that he knew we were onto him. The evidence snowball turned into an avalanche faster than Jenkins could grade a paper without his calculator app. Suddenly everyone's got receipts, screenshots, and enough documentation to wallpaper the entire school district office. The guidance counselor Imogen had started drafting context letters for all the affected seniors to send to colleges explaining the grading dispute. She couldn't change our transcripts yet, but could add official documentation that grades were under review, which was at least something even if it wasn't enough to fix the damage. I'd already gotten an email from one college admissions officer saying they'd note the context but couldn't reverse their decision unless grades were officially changed on the transcript. They suggested reapplying next year or considering transfer options, which meant my dream school was slipping away, but at least they were listening and not just ignoring us. The crowd kept growing as word spread through social media, and we discovered Jenkins's scheme went beyond just AP literature when parents from his previous years started sharing similar stories. One mom said her daughter had straight A's until Jenkins's class 3 years ago, and she'd always wondered why the grade was so low, but never connected it to the tutoring thing until now. Another dad said his son had been in Jenkins's sophomore English class and failed until they paid for tutoring, then suddenly got A's, which he thought was just good teaching at the time. The scope kept growing with each story, and it became clear this had been going on for years with hundreds of kids affected. Honoria stood up next, holding her final statistical report, and read the numbers out loud so everyone could hear them clearly. Students who paid for tutoring averaged 92%, while non-paying students averaged 31%, and the probability of this happening naturally was less than 1 in a million. She called it the clearest case of grade manipulation she'd seen in her 20 years of analyzing education data, and several board members were taking notes. Wood tried to interrupt, saying we should discuss this in closed session, but the crowd shouted him down and the board chair told him to let Honoria finish. After the meeting ended, I heard from a teacher who pulled my mom aside that Wood had sent an internal memo warning teachers about communicating with parents about the situation. Several teachers wanted to support us but couldn't speak publicly without risking their jobs, which showed how deep the intimidation ran through the whole system. The next day, one of the parents got a text from a friend who worked in the English department saying the chair had been told to keep quiet about Jenkins, but had files documenting weird grading patterns she'd been tracking for months. She wouldn't come forward publicly because she needed her job, but wanted us to know she saw what was happening and had proof locked in her desk drawer. That same afternoon, another parent was cleaning out her car and found a flyer that had fallen out of her daughter's backpack advertising Jenkins' private test prep services with the school logo right at the top next to his name and title. The flyer promised guaranteed grade improvement for students who enrolled in his weekend sessions at $200 per hour, which against district rules about using your job to make money on the side. Mrs. Lapp grabbed that flyer and added it to our growing pile of evidence while posting a photo of it in the Facebook group, which made everyone even madder. Someone else dug through their kids' old papers and found Jenkins had actually added a page to his syllabus halfway through the semester, recommending his premium preparation services for anyone serious about college success. He was basically turning his classroom into an advertisement for his side business, and nobody had caught it until now. The district must have gotten wind of what we were planning because they sent out a security memo to to all parents, warning that recording on the school property without consent could result in disciplinary action or legal consequences. My parents showed it to their lawyer friend, who laughed and said we were protected since I'd recorded someone threatening me, which falls under different rules. One of the parents in our group was actually an attorney, and she pulled my mom aside at the next meeting to suggest we submit the audio recording privately to the board's legal counsel instead of playing it publicly. She explained this would protect us from any legal issues while making sure the board members heard the evidence before the public meeting. We spent the next hour reorganizing our whole presentation strategy based on her advice, with different parents taking responsibility for different pieces of evidence. I had another meeting scheduled with Imogen that week to talk about my college options now that my grades were trashed. She pulled up schools with strong transfer programs and spring admission deadlines that were still open, which made me feel slightly less hopeless about my future. She showed me community colleges that had guaranteed transfer agreements with good universities and explained how I could still end up where I wanted, even if the path was different. Meanwhile, things got more complicated when Yvette's parents sent a message to the Facebook group asking everyone to stop mentioning their daughter in posts and discussions. They were worried she might lose her valedictorian spot if she got caught up in the whole mess, which made us realize how many different ways this situation was affecting people. Another English teacher, who'd been watching everything unfold quietly, approached one of the parents and offered to blind grade sample essays from Jenkins' class without knowing whose they were. She was risking her job by helping, but said she couldn't stand by and watch academic integrity get destroyed at our school. The parent collected 10 essays that Jenkins had failed, including 3 of mine, and gave them to this teacher with all names removed. A week later, she came back with her grades, and every single essay she'd graded came back with at least a B or better, with most getting A's. She'd written detailed comments explaining her scoring, and it matched almost exactly what the outside professor had said about the same essays. The evidence was getting overwhelming, with multiple independent sources all saying the same thing about Jenkins' grading being completely wrong. Even parents who'd been skeptical at first couldn't deny the pattern anymore when they saw professional educators consistently grading these essays 60 to 70 points higher than Jenkins had. The morning of the board meeting, my stomach was in knots as we drove to the district office. The parking lot was already packed, and we had to the park 3 blocks away and walk back. Inside the meeting room was standing room only, with over 100 people crammed in, including parents and students, and even some teachers who'd come to see what would happen. The energy felt electric and dangerous, like everyone was holding their breath waiting for something to explode. Board members were already seated at the front, looking uncomfortable as they watched the crowd grow bigger and bigger. Principal Wood was sitting off to the side with Jenkins next to him, both of them staring straight ahead and avoiding eye contact with anyone. Parents were whispering to each other and passing around copies of evidence while students filmed everything on their phones despite the security warnings. The board chair kept checking his watch and shuffling papers nervously as more people squeezed into the room. My mom had our folder of evidence ready, and I could see other parents with their own stacks of papers prepared to present. The attorney parent had already submitted the audio recording to the board's lawyer that morning, so they'd had time to listen to Jenkins threatening me. When the board chair finally called the meeting to order, his voice cracked slightly, and he had to clear his throat and start again. Principal Wood stood up and clicked through his laptop to project slides on the screen behind him. His first chart showed grade distributions that looked perfectly normal if you didn't know what to look for. He pointed at different colored bars while explaining how Jenkins followed standard grading practices and how the complaints came from students who simply weren't meeting expectations. My mom's hand gripped my shoulder so tight it hurt. The chart he showed next compared our class grades to previous years, but he'd averaged everything together so you couldn't see the pattern of who got A's and who failed. Parents started shifting in their seats, and I heard someone behind us mutter something angry. Wood kept clicking through more charts that all seemed designed to hide the real problem. When he got to a slide about academic standards, I watched 3 board members exchange looks. Wood finished by saying his investigation found no evidence of improper grading practices and recommended the board dismiss all complaints. The room erupted with parents talking over each other until the board chair banged his gavel. During public comment period, Honoria stood up first with a thick folder of papers. She walked to the podium and pulled out her own charts that she'd made after collecting grade data from 27 families. Her first graph showed exactly what Wood had tried to hide. Every single student in tutoring got A's, and every single student not in tutoring got D's or F's. She explained how the probability of this happening by chance was less than winning the lottery twice. Board members started leaning forward and taking notes. She showed another chart comparing our essays to grades and pointed out how identical quality work got opposite scores based on tutoring status. Her voice stayed calm and professional while she destroyed Wood's presentation piece by piece. When she sat down, the room was completely quiet. The board chair called my name next, and my legs felt like jelly walking to the podium. I'd practiced what to say, but my voice still shook when I started talking. Honoria just served up statistical destruction with the calm precision of someone defrosting a turkey. Methodical, thorough, and leaving Wood's presentation completely cooked. Nothing says gotcha quite like math that proves your corruption better than a lottery win comparison. I explained how I went from straight A's to failing overnight and showed them my essays from before and after Jenkins arrived. I told them about the professor who graded my work and found it deserved 80% or higher. Then I pulled out my phone and explained I had a recording of Jenkins threatening me, but I'd already given it to their lawyer that morning. The board members all turned to look at their attorney, who nodded. I walked back to my seat with my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Yvette went next, and I could tell she didn't want to be there. She said Jenkins knew the material really well and helped students who came to tutoring, but admitted not everyone had the same experience in his class. She kept looking at the floor, and her voice got quieter with each sentence. When someone on the board asked if she thought the grading was fair, she paused for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she said different students might see it differently and sat down fast. The professor I'd contacted months ago took the podium next and introduced herself as having 20 years of teaching experience. She explained how she'd reviewed 15 essays that Jenkins had failed and found them all to be passing quality work. She held up one of my essays and read a paragraph out loud, then explained why it showed strong analysis and writing skills. She said any teacher giving this work 10% was either incompetent or had other motives. The board members were all taking notes now, and one of them asked her to submit all her evaluations as evidence. The union representative went next and reminded everyone about due process and teacher contracts. She said Jenkins had rights that needed to be respected, and any action taken had to follow proper procedures. She looked uncomfortable the whole time, like she knew she was defending something wrong, but had to do her job anyway. She finished by warning the board about potential lawsuits if they acted without following every contractual requirement. The board members started asking questions, and it got intense fast. One board member asked Wood why his charts didn't show the tutoring correlation, and Wood stammered something about different data sets. Another board member asked Jenkins directly about the recording, and Jenkins said I'd taken his words out of context. The board's lawyer kept whispering to the board chair about legal stuff, and I heard words like liability and exposure. Some board members seemed ready to fire Jenkins right then, while others worried about getting sued by the union. They went back and forth for almost an hour, with parents occasionally shouting comments until the chair called for order. Finally, they went into closed session, and we all had to wait in the hallway. Parents clustered in groups talking about what might happen, and Jenkins stood in a corner with a union rep who kept checking her phone. After what felt like forever, they called us back in. The board chair announced they were placing Jenkins on paid administrative leave immediately pending an external investigation. They also authorized a review of all grades from his classes, but wouldn't commit to changing them yet. Parents started yelling about how this wasn't enough, and my mom stood up to say something, but my dad pulled her back down. We filed out of the meeting room, and in the hallway, Jenkins walked past without looking at anyone while his union rep talked fast on her phone. I heard her mention something about filing a grievance and preparing for legal action. Kids from the school started texting me, asking what happened, and rumors spread fast about Jenkins maybe suing the district. Within 2 days, a reporter published an article about the whole thing, and it spread all over social media. The comment section turned into a war zone, with some parents sharing similar stories about other teachers, while some students defended Jenkins, saying he was a good teacher who just had high standards. Our town basically split into two camps, with people arguing about it at the grocery store and on neighborhood Facebook pages. 3 days later, the district brought in an interim teacher to take over our AP Lit class. She walked in looking stressed and told us she'd been given boxes of our old work to review. She spent the first week just going through everything Jenkins had graded. I watched her shake her head a lot while reading our essays. She bumped some of our grades up, but only by like 10 or 15%. My 18% essay became a 35%, still failing. She kept saying she couldn't just change everything without proper documentation. The damage was already done anyway. Our transcripts had been sent to colleges months ago with those bad grades on them. Imogen from the counseling office started working overtime to send out updated reports to all the schools we'd applied to. She wrote these long letters explaining what happened with Jenkins and attached news articles about the investigation. I sat in her office while she called admissions offices trying to get them to reconsider. One school moved me from rejected to deferred. Another put me on their wait list, but most of them said it was too late in the process to change anything. My parents met with a lawyer that week to talk about suing Jenkins directly. The guy charged $200 just for the consultation. He spread out all our evidence on his conference table and said we definitely had a case. But then he explained it could take 3 years and cost $20,000 in legal fees. Even if we won, Jenkins probably didn't have money to pay damages. My dad kept asking about the school district's liability, but the lawyer said they'd fight it hard. We decided to keep documenting everything but not file anything yet. I spent hours writing addendums for my remaining college applications. Every draft sounded either too whiny or like I was making excuses. How do you explain that your teacher was corrupt without sounding like you're just mad about bad grades? I rewrote the same paragraph 20 times trying to get the tone right. My mom read each version and kept telling me to be more direct, but my dad said I needed to sound more professional. Neither approach felt right. Kids started talking about how the district was trying to make Jenkins resign quietly with some kind of settlement. Someone's parent who worked at the district office leaked that they were offering him $40,000 to leave without making a fuss. The idea that he'd get paid to go away made everyone mad. My mom posted about it in the Facebook group, and within an hour there were 200 angry comments. But the lawyer had warned us this was how these things usually worked. Schools protect themselves first. A week later, Principal Wood called a school assembly to announce new policies. He stood at the podium talking about grade review procedures and mandatory disclosure for paid tutoring services. Everyone knew it was just for show. He'd keep his job even though he'd enabled Jenkins for months. The real changes would never happen. He finished by saying the school was committed to fairness and excellence. Some kids actually laughed. Spring came and I had to make a decision about college. My safety school had accepted me, and they actually had a decent computer science program. It wasn't MIT or Stanford like I'd dreamed about, but the professors seemed good when I visited. My parents kept saying everything happens for a reason, and maybe this was meant to be. I tried to believe them, but it still hurt seeing other kids posting about their dream schools. The parent group kept meeting every week, but fewer people showed up each time. Some families were exhausted from fighting for months with no real results. Others had kids who were graduating and just wanted to move on. Mrs. Lapp sent emails warning that without constant pressure, the district would go back to business as usual. She organized letter writing campaigns and petition drives, but the energy was fading. Parents started arguing about whether to keep pushing or accept what little change had happened. Graduation day arrived in June, and I walked across that stage knowing my transcript still showed those unfair grades. My diploma felt weird in my hands, like it represented something false. But I also knew I'd stood up to corruption and helped expose the truth. Other kids thanked me for recording Jenkins and starting everything. Some parents shook my hand and said I was brave. That had to count for something even if the system hadn't really changed. Years passed, and every few months I'd search for Jenkins online to see if he was teaching anywhere. I never found him in any school directories, which made me feel better. The state investigation must have found enough to end his teaching career, even if he never got arrested. I heard from kids still at the school that they never hired another teacher who offered paid tutoring. Sometimes partial justice is all you get in these situations. At least future students wouldn't deal with what we went through. My safety school turned out pretty good actually, and I graduated with honors. But I still wonder sometimes what would have happened if Jenkins had never shown up. Time really flew by digging into all that together. Feels good exposing a little corruption along the way. Thanks for hanging out and letting me share my random observations. Catch you on the flip side. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.